morning, everyone. First of all, let me, on behalf of UNDP, thank everyone who's here with us today for this Integrity and Transparency Assessment Day, and then greetings to all the participants. I think it's a very timely discussion and an important day that is taking place today. And the reason I'm saying that is I think increasingly it's becoming more clear that integrity and transparency are essential ingredients when it comes to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and also the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that Thailand, like many other countries, have actually committed to. Thailand, as we know, and we've seen it in its 2021 Voluntary National Review, which was submitted to the United Nations last year, has made important progress across many SDGs, SDG 1, on poverty reduction, on health, on education, on employment. But unfortunately and sadly, similar to many other countries with the pandemic, a lot of this progress have actually been impacted negatively. The pandemic was not just a health crisis, but it also had important impact negatively on many social and economic factors in the Thai society, like I mentioned earlier, many other countries. And this really calls for much more accelerated efforts across all spheres of society in pushing forward the 2030 Agenda so that countries like Thailand can achieve those global goals by the timeline that has been set, which is 2030. And I remember when I was addressing probably the same audience back in 2020, it was on the ITA Day as well, I made reference to the United Nations Secretary General's message asking for a decade of action, referring to a decade of action, and making a big call at the global, at the local, and at the people level for much more accelerated effort together to achieve the 2030 Agenda. And this is important because it also requires partnership, collaboration, and a whole of society and a whole of government approach. But what I wanted to say today was even though we have all these accelerated efforts and focus and commitment by all the stakeholders, if countries don't embed in their system, in the mechanism, in their policies, in their practice, and that goes beyond just government, also with the private sector, if they don't have integrity and transparency mechanisms in place, none of those goals will be achieved. And increasingly at the UN, it's becoming extremely clear with the experience we've seen in many countries that SDG 16, which is a focus on peace, on justice, on strong institutions, is an important accelerator for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. And the reason I'm saying that is the SDG 16, which basically have indicators when it comes to combating corruption, when it comes to improving transparency, when it comes to tackling illicit trade flows, and when it comes to making more access to data and information, talks to the fact that unless and until those principles of integrity and transparency, which are embedded in those few areas I've mentioned, talks to the fact that if those are not in existence, not only SDG 16 will not be achieved, but the whole spectrum of SDGs across the board. And that will have an important impact on the overall 2030 Agenda. We've seen in many countries where there are less corruptive practices and where there are less bribery, less evasion of taxes, these countries have actually been able to make important savings and redirect those additional resources which would otherwise have gone into non-essential services to much more important socioeconomic services for people who are more in need. And here I have in mind sectors like the education sector, the health sector, the social protection sector, increasingly more important in the context of COVID, where we've seen many countries like Thailand struggling with regard to fiscal space. And then also many countries where we've seen that integrity and transparency has been compromised. This has created a lot of mistrust between people and the government, and potentially with implications with regard to violence, injustice, exclusion, and also undermining important progress that countries have made on human development front. When it comes to Thailand and its work on integrity and transparency, I wanted to really commend the government of Thailand for having taken quite a number of positive steps, which I believe many other countries, both in the region and globally, can actually learn from. And here I have in mind an important milestone that took place in 2016 when Thailand enacted its first Public Procurement Act. And UNDP, we were very pleased to actually partner with Thailand in supporting a very important public procurement reform back in 2016, which had important positive impact on the economy. This reform and the act itself was mainly aimed at actually maximizing value for money, embedding integrity standards across all sectors, but importantly, to increase public participation when it comes to scrutinizing government contracts. And here, I would like to comment one important initiative in that regard, which is the Integrity Pact. The Integrity Pact, which basically allows Thailand to basically take more measures to prevent corruption, but also to ensure fair competition and give confidence, importantly, to private sector when it comes to their interest in public-private initiative. And this is an initiative which we have been together with our partners working very closely on, and we, in many forums where we engage, we make reference to Thailand's experience in this field. The other area of work which the National Anti-Corruption Commission has spearheaded has been in the field of integrity and transparency assessment, which is why we're actually here today. And let me, before I speak to that initiative, congratulate all the winners of this year's initiative, because I think by getting this award, I hope that you're also setting a standard and for other entities to follow suit and to follow your shoes. So really well done, and congratulations again on behalf of UNDP. With the ITA, we are very closely working with NACC to see how we can improve the approach and the methodology further. And here, one of the key aspects, and I go back to this issue of public participation, in particular when it comes to having access to data. And the good thing is that one of the aspects of ITA is also looking at open data review. And I think NACC should increasingly leverage on that important aspect, because as we know, data is an important element of creating confidence and trust in the people. And data disclosure not only gets people to have access to information to monitor the work of government, but also to feel more engaged. But increasingly important in situations where we have seen the pandemic impacting countries where lots of complex challenges are actually coming to the surface, and where SDGs is being compromised, data becomes even more critical so that we understand what the problems are, what the challenges are, and we are able to design solutions, policies, regulations, which are driven by real-time, high-quality, and authentic data. And this whole agenda on data democratization, which I hope is an area where we can see further improvement and further work on in Thailand. And it goes not just for state actors, but also for non-state actors in Thailand. In Thailand, we've also done some interesting work with the private sector. And again, here, very important progress that we've seen over the years when it comes to the private sector embracing responsible business conduct and integrity standards in their business operation. And a partnership that we as UNDP has established with the Securities and Exchange Commission to see how we can get more companies on board to have more responsible business conduct through a program that we have launched a couple of years back, which is called Business and Human Rights. With the private sector, we have been also engaging with the Coalition Against Corruption on a very interesting survey which looks at how private sector sees government entities' practices and how corrupt the private sector feels those entities are, and what can be done to basically address those issues. We have now a series of recommendations which in the next phase of this initiative, we would like to create a dialogue with the government and the private sector, not to point fingers at, but most importantly to look at those recommendations and see how together and collaboratively we can address them, so that there is more trust from the private sector side when it comes to investing, when it comes to engaging with the government, and not to feel that every a part of the way they might potentially face elements of bribery or elements of corruption practices. Another area of work that we've worked with on the private sector, and I've mentioned that earlier, is with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is an area of work that UNDP would like to scale and reach out to more companies when it comes to embracing good and responsible conduct and good governance in their business operations. I wanted to make reference to a report that was launched last year on enabling the implementation of the 2030 agenda through the SDG 16. The reason I wanted to mention that in particular is because this report talks about how critical SDG 16 is in accelerating the achievement of other SDGs in any country. That report talks about important recommendations when it comes to inclusion and participatory approach, when it comes to accountable institution, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to access to data. But most importantly, it talks about an important element, which is about the criticality of multi-stakeholder partnership. And here it's partnership not just between the governments themselves or among the government, and here not just at national but also subnational level, but it also talks about society, young people, the academia, the youth of today, and civil society organization coming together and working as a whole of society approach together with the government to achieve the SDGs. The report acknowledges that national governments alone cannot be responsible, and nor should they be responsible in the achievement of the 2030 agenda, and hence the importance of actually bringing all those partners on board and working together to achieve the SDGs. Another element of the report, which UNDP here in Thailand attaches a lot of priority to, and in fact it's spelled out very strongly in our new country program for Thailand for the period 2022-2026, is this whole agenda of SDG localization. How can we bring the SDG agenda to the local level, to the local government, to local civil society, to local people, to local youths, so that not only they understand what it means, but they also understand that through their actions, even though it's at the local level, they're actually contributing to a national and a global agenda. So moving forward, we will be looking forward to working with many of you who are present here and with all the partners with whom we're already engaging with to see how we can reach out to all the provinces in Thailand, working very closely across local government, civil society, academic institution, with the youth, to see how we can find local solutions to address many of the problems that are facing those provinces and ultimately contributing to the 2030 agenda. It will be important moving forward that all government agencies, both at the national and also subnational level, to embrace principles of integrity and transparency because of what I mentioned earlier, because of their importance, their criticality to the achievement of the SDGs in Thailand. And to do so, there are a lot of mechanisms, a lot of toolkits, a lot of guidelines that have been developed, not just by UNDP, but many other international and national partners, which I believe should be a priority in the work and in the way government functions. I spoke earlier about how important principles of integrity and transparency are in relation to countries' achievement of the SDGs. And it should be the responsibility of all government agencies, both at national level and subnational level, in embedding those standards in their day-to-day process, their mechanisms, their policies, the way they formulate budget, the way they implement program and project, and also the way they monitor and they evaluate those initiatives. But this will not be successful unless and until people are being consulted. To bring in people so that there is trust, but also to have people to have a voice in policies and mechanism which at the end of the day benefits those people. So having policies which are citizen driven, so by the people, for the people, providing access to authentic and reliable data so that people are not just engaged but also are informed about what government is doing and how taxpayers' money is being used is extremely important as part of the whole integrity and transparency agenda. And here, I would really urge all government entities in Thailand to really prioritize this important aspect, because it's not only about transparency per se, it's also about creating trust among the people of Thailand, and together with the people of Thailand, in a collaborative manner, work towards the achievement of the SDGs for the country.